Today we are looking at Carl Walker's Fons Americanus. It was made for the Tate Modern Museum's 2019 Hyundai Commission, and it's located in the Turbine Hall in London, England. Walker's four-tiered fountain is inspired by the Victoria Memorial in front of the Buckingham Palace, made to honor the accomplishments of Queen Victoria. However, instead of a celebration, Fons Americanus flips the usual narrative of a memorial and questions narratives of power. Walker chose to do a public fountain because of recent protests to take down monuments that celebrate colonialism in both the US and the UK. This forces us to ask uncomfortable questions of historical violence against Black people of Africa and its diaspora that's often forgotten. Water is a key theme for Walker in Americanus because of its connection to the transatlantic slave trade and the fates and tragedies that came as a result of it. The piece is an allegory for the violence that came and followed during and after the slave trade. Through fact, fantasy, and fiction, Walker speaks about the fundamental pieces of our history. In the lowest basin of the fountain, we can see a model of a fishing boat that sprung a leak. Given the tension of the scene, we can see that the sailor is at risk. This first level of the fountain is inspired by Winslow Homer's The Gulf Stream of 1899. The painting depicts a black sailor with no sail while sharks surround the boat. There is a sense of hopelessness in both this level of the fountain and the painting, as we can see large, well-equipped ships sailing away from the sailless boat, leaving them to fend for themselves in the violent ocean. The second level of the fountain references Joseph Maller William Turner's Slave Ship from 1840, which paints the horrifying real story of a slave ship whose captain had thrown overboard sick and dying slaves so he could collect insurance money. Just as in the first level, these victims are left for dead in these unfathomable conditions, showing that man can be just as brutal as the wild sea. Walker names this section of her fountain the physical impossibility of blackness in the mind of someone white. This section alludes to the tragic loss of lives on these dangerous and forced journeys and the absence of representation of these stories in history. The middle of the sculpture depicts the next four pillars of Black history: ignorance, abuse of power, violence, and strength. First up, we have what Walker calls Queen Vicky. If it's not obvious by the name, this sculpture is yet another reference to Queen Victoria and the Buckingham Memorial, where the Queen is sitting regally on her throne, front and center. Yet, in Walker's depiction, the Queen is at the back of the fountain. She is joyful, laughing, and holding a coconut, which is a common symbol of a rich life, while at her feet is the hunching personification of melancholy. Next to the Queen, we have Kneeling Man, a caricature of slave and plantation owner from the Caribbean, Governor Sir William Young, who appears to be begging in a posture of remorse. On the other side of Queen Vicky is the tree. This is a very direct example of the violence and tragedy in the Atlantic world, with the placement of a noose hanging from a branch, clearly exemplifying the frequent violent lynchings of African Americans by white supremacists after the U.S. Civil War and Emancipation. In the front, we see the captain. He is a composite of important Black rebels that went against European colonization. Two men that directly influenced Walker for this portion of her fountain were Francis Dominique Toussaint L'Ouverture, the leader of the Haitian Revolution, and Marcus Garvey, a Jamaican-born nationalist and leader of the Pan-Africanism movement in America. The captain is a combination of these real-life heroes and fictional characters that represent Walker's desire to fight against European colonialism. The very top level of the fountain is a sculpture of Venus, who is also referenced earlier in Shell Grotto, who has water coming out of her mouth and breasts. Many of us know Venus from Greek mythology, but Walker specifically references the 19th century engraving, The Voyage of the Sable Venus from Angola to the West Indies. This engraving portrays Venus as an African woman standing on an open shell, surrounded by white angels. They are being led by Triton, the god of the sea, who is carrying the British flag and guiding everyone across the waters. This image was originally used as propaganda to promote the slave trade, but Walker reclaims the image through her sculpture at the top of the fountain, renaming her the Daughter of Waters. Walker describes that the amniotic fluid at the beginning of this journey is now transformed into mother's milk and lifeblood. Mother, wet nurse, whore, saint, host, lover. She is the daughter of waters. With this, she is revived as a priestess of African history who is taking her rightful place as the final voice in the story. Overall, Fons Americanus is a hauntingly beautiful example of the Black identity through its historical context and the reclamation of that identity with Venus, the goddess of love. This piece encourages the African diaspora to reclaim what it historically means to be Black and loving their identity because of the sacrifices and strength of their ancestors.